So, good morning, dear friends, and welcome to the main object big book study of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an alcoholic. My name is David. So good to see you all this morning. And we're going to start out with the preamble. I think our friend Linda is going to read that for us. And let me just bring it up here.
All right, my name is Linda and I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Linda, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And so, welcome everybody. Welcome to all of you. As you probably know, we are a line by line big book study. But before I get too far ahead of myself, remember what I said about getting distracted. I'm going to jump back and if you would join me in inviting God into the meeting with the serenity prayer, please. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right. Now, once again, we are a line by line big book study, and the purpose of that, of course, is to unlock the book and turn it into an empowering tool that we can use to not just navigate our own sobriety, but to share it with others and to experience what our literature, what the big book especially, and the 12 and 12 talk about in their opening pages, which is building an expansive network of fellow recovering individuals. And so what we do, you're probably well familiar by now, is that we categorize the text into 5 categories. Let me see. Okay, there we go. Now it's there. Okay, and you'll see there, and we've got questions, directions, and explanations, promises, warnings, and history. And I think we're going to touch upon all 5 of those today, and that information will be in the chat as well. The colors are the highlighter colors that I use because I love. I think highlighting really opens up the power of the big book for us, for me anyway. And I assure you, it has nothing to do with my addiction to office products. I swear to God. So although I have multiple post-it tabs in my book as well, but that's another fellowship. Okay, so a different kind of 12 steps. But seriously, what we'll do is I'll go over the text. We're starting on page 49. We're going to start on we who have traveled this dubious path, and then we're going to hopefully make it all the way over to page 51. And what I'll do now is just offer you a quick summary, just to sort of set the stage, see where we're at, and get ready to move forward today. So last week we touched upon page 48, and there in that section, Bill suggests that the reader may want to ask himself why he should believe in a power greater than himself. But he doesn't answer that question right away. He poses the question, and then he goes on to suggest that a belief in a higher power is actually fully compatible with our modern way of living. And now he's writing this in 1939. But I think it's important to point out that his points and the points he goes on to make today are not only incredibly valid, but for 1939, but the rationale he points out is equally effective and just as important today in 2023, over 80 years later. So in today's reading, he assures us that reliance on a higher power, it's not a disadvantage or too old-fashioned. It's not going to put us out of step with a modern way of life or with the people around us. So once he's done that, he goes back and answers the question he posed on 48, why we should believe in a power greater than ourselves. And he provides clear, irrefutable reasons why for us such a belief is essential. And he does this first by asking that we make an open-minded re-examination of those non-alcoholics who follow traditional religions. AA sometimes, and we'll get into this, but AA sometimes puts you can sometimes hear a negative spin about traditional religions in Alcoholics Anonymous. Sometimes it's mild and sometimes it's not so mild. And but I think importantly, when we look at what our founder advocated, he actually told us to find out where these people are right. And so anyway, so with this, talking about traditional religions, he makes it plain that despite our own overwhelming prejudice, religious-minded people, quote, were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves, unquote. And then he turns, so he's talking about religious people, and then he turns the spotlight back to Alcoholics Anonymous itself, and he looks closer to home at those AAs who have successfully overcome their limiting beliefs and embraced a power greater than themselves. Now, these AAs, he points out, go on to experience, quote, a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. But Bill, once having made that point, Bill doesn't stop there. Our founder closes out the section we're going to read today by proposing an even bolder claim, suggesting, well, let me, I'm getting revved up already. Let me take a quick poll. Who's ever been in a meeting and heard, this is about alcohol, front and center? This ain't about anything else. Well, what's Bill say? Bill says, he suggests we leave aside the drink question. Ooh, total heresy. And he suggests that even if we had not experienced alcoholic destruction, meaning us, even if alcohol had not destroyed our lives, it's our inability or unwillingness to follow a power greater than ourselves that would have still led us to a life of despair and dissatisfaction. Remember when it talked about our alcohol was but a symptom? And so we're going to touch on that. So anyway, let's jump in. We are on page 49. And we are on the paragraph, we who have traveled this dubious path. And just so you know, the first several sentences there, about the first half of that paragraph, are, I have it as explanation. And so I have that in green. And so he starts out, we who have traveled this dubious path, and I looked to the dictionary, and dubious means doubtful. So he's talking about, and just forgive me, but just to put it in context, what he's talking about is, remember, we closed out last week's section by talking about how we treasure our mind as being our intellect as being the alpha and omega of existence, the beginning and the end. If we can't think it or understand it, it doesn't count. That's the way our thinking goes. And now Bill is saying this is a dubious path. It's shaky ground, it's thin ice. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. I have all of that as direction. Okay? So just to calibrate your, let's say, your non-big book alert system. So when you're sitting in a meeting and you hear things such as AA is our spirit, AA is spiritual, and spirituality is for people. It's not for people who are afraid of hell. That's religion. It's for people who have been there. Be careful of that logic, okay? Because again, it's subtly anti-religious, and again, we have no opinion except to say that Bill tells us to not be prejudiced and to embrace what works. So, moving on, the rest of this paragraph I have as a warning, so I have it as pink. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatsoever, meaning that people who had religion had a logical conception of life. We did not. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds. Pause button. A creed is again from the dictionary, a brief statement of belief. What we believe. Like, for instance, in the Catholic faith, they have things called like the Apostles' Creed, which is a statement that affirms belief, or the Nicene Creed. And I'm sure other religions have their own creeds. So he's saying that people who adhere to those types of statements, they were actually, and really hear this, folks, those folks were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness, which we should have sought ourselves. And we're going to go on to, as we'll see when we get to, I think, 51, this notion of stability, happiness, and usefulness is critical. It's not just a byproduct of our recovery program. You could almost say, to quote Bill from last week, it's the alpha and omega, the beginning and the end. So moving on, the next paragraph at the top of 50, I have the whole paragraph as warning. Instead, we, meaning all of us, looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale, meaning total, condemnation. In other words, we became experts, ninjas, at throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. And now he's going to get into or he'll get a little further down rather. He'll get into what exactly that fair hearing might want to look like. This next paragraph I have again as an entirely explanation. So all of it is green. That's the second full paragraph on page 50. In our personal stories, you find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives the power which is greater than himself. Because remember the first premise that we learned about a spiritual way of life. Ebby tells Bill, why don't you choose your own conception of a higher power? And here that holds true. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make of little difference. Again, this whole notion, and I think it's important at our, pardon me, please, it's important for our understanding today. This notion between the forest and the trees, or the close look and the big picture. And Bill keeps advising us to don't get caught up in the individual cases. Look at the big picture. So, experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. We need not be worried about the trees. The real story is the forest. These are questions for each individual to settle himself. So it's he's taking that paragraph, and that is just a more detailed way of stating what Ebby told Bill. Choose your own conception. What's important is not that it be this or that. What's important is what it does for you. And now we're going to get into that, the results of such a belief. Moving on, we're in the middle now, third full paragraph of 50, and the first half of that paragraph, which would be the first two sentences, I have as, again, more explanation in green. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. Even, I'm just going to jump for a second over to the 12 and 12. Even think about the second step in the 12 and 12. What does it talk about? It doesn't even talk about a supernatural deity. It talks about you can start out using your, quote, closest AA friend. And then it says the AA group. And then over time, that hopefully will move to something a little bit more, I'm just going to say universal, or even, dare I say, cosmic. The rest of this paragraph I have as promise. So he's talking about every one of these people has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power, and now this is a promise or a reward, this promise has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. And I, just to make sure I wasn't making any assumptions, I looked up the definition of the word miraculous. And it said to perform supernaturally. As a celebrated statesman put it, let's look at the record. And just as a piece of background information, I'm going to share with you, I did a little research. And who he's talking about, now remember, Bill is, where's he writing from? He's writing from New York City. And he is talking about this gentleman who I had never heard of, but Alfred E. Smith. And he was much beloved four-time governor of New York. Go figure. Okay? And he even ran for president against Herbert Hoover. But he had a watchword, and as you can see there, his watchword was, let's look at the record. And I think that link or a similar link is in the chat if you want to follow up on that. So that's who Bill is talking about. And readers of that time, now remember, this is somebody who ran for president. So readers of 1949 would have been familiar with that phrase, let's look at the record, just as many of us are familiar with other phrases that we may hear other politicians
I'm sorry to
saying
interrupt you.
today.
Is that line history then? We had a
No,
promise.
it is a reward. It or well, you could say it's direction, but I'm saying it's part of the power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the truly impossible. And so it's part of that, and that I'm using it to illustrate, or I see it as illustrating, let's look at the record of the miraculous. And so for most of this next paragraph, I think except for the last like 1.5 words on the bottom of the page, I have this all as reward or promise. So for me, it's in blue. And he's cutting right to the chase, and he's talking about, here are the facts about Alcoholics Anonymous. We have thousands, today we would say millions, of men and women, worldly indeed. And again, worldly was something I assumed I knew the definition, but I looked it up. And I did not know the definition. It means devoted to this life and enjoying its advantages. Meaning, these were people who were dialed in. They were not ignorant or limited. So here were thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declared that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things. I'm going to hit the pause button for a second. Remember back on page 48, Bill poses a question. The reader may still ask himself why he should believe in a power greater than himself. He is about to answer that directly. Took him a page or almost 2 pages to set it up, but here is the answer. There has been, I'm back on 50, in the middle of the paragraph, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. So let's think about that, ladies and gentlemen. What he is saying there is this power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction is the payoff that we receive from a power greater than ourselves. And his argument or his premise is that with that power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction will also come the elimination of our desire for alcohol and the urges to drink. But it doesn't, now what, notice what he's not saying. He's not saying because they attended daily AA meetings or because they're making coffee. I'm not saying those are bad things. But let's not put the cart before the horse. Now I'm at the bottom of 50, and we're going to close out this paragraph and open up the discussion. So these next few sentences I have as in green, as explanation or direction. And you could almost say they're a warning, but I think it's, for me personally, it was important to look at them as direction, and we'll see why in a moment. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, and again, futility was a word I thought I knew, but I needed to make sure. It means uselessness. Think about this. Confused and baffled by the seeming uselessness of existence. Hitting the pause button for a moment, thinking back on our drinking or early sobriety, or maybe even sobriety without the steps. Can anyone here relate to, and you don't have to raise your hand, but just think about, can you relate to being confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence? And I will just say, I know that I can. They show the underlying reason why we were making heavy going of life. And here we go, gang. We're near the end of our reading today, and Bill goes for the touchdown. Here it is. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. Ladies and gentlemen, no one loves a good drunkalogue more than me, I think. I love it. I love it. I love the stories, where the guy hijacks a helicopter and, wakes up. I mean, where it sounds like it's Mission Impossible 8. And, he gets on a motorcycle and he goes over a cliff. But I love those drunkalogues. But what's Bill saying here? What he's saying is what has been my experience as well, is for me the most moving, powerful messages have been where the person shares their drunkalog, and then they move beyond that to talk about the causes and conditions underneath, the beliefs, their values, their prejudices, their character defects that led them to the drink, such that the drinking almost becomes secondary. And I'm not saying it's unimportant, because remember, I believe in a primary purpose. But they understand their disease as being something much bigger and more profound than their drinking. They understand it to be a result of a godless way of life. And that's a bold statement, but that's clearly what Bill is saying here, leaving aside the drink question. They show how the change came over them, and then we close it out with reward here. So the rest of this paragraph, when many hundreds of people are able to say the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. And with that, the question he posed on page 48, with that, it is case closed, and why we should believe. So I'm going to open it up, but I want to throw out three questions in case you're not sure where to go with any of this. And you can use these as prompts, or you can share on anything or refute anything I said. That's fine. But some questions for reflection. The first one is, looking at our own circumstances, do we have a clear understanding of why we must believe in a power greater than ourselves? Looking at our own story, not just what the book says. 2, am I able to, quote, leave aside the drink question, unquote, and understand why I previously had such a difficult time getting through life? 3, have I ever feared that, given our modern digital age lifestyles, belief and reliance on a higher power is simply, quote, not practical or would be out of step with the rest of society? So, with that, I'm going to open it up.